Well, I think the one thing that makes sense, but it's tough, and I'm gonna, you said a lot that I think hits on a lot of good points. But I think the main thing was access. The main thing is she was in many ways a Trump insider, and a lot of Trump insiders would not even want to do business with an MSNBC. But the problem is, and you talked about Kinzinger. Let's talk about even Rona's uncle Mitt. Um, the problem is that the Republicans that would be acceptable. And when I say acceptable, I'm talking about acceptable from an ethical standpoint, acceptable from a responsible, using responsible language. They can be very hardcore conservative and everything else, but they're still, responsible. Is that the Republican Party is led by a bunch of extremists, and so realistically, if you want to get and hear and have a paid contributor who's going to um, well represent the current Republican Party, they are most likely going to be an extremist. And I think your point is, which I agree with, is there's while there's a lot of people in the Trump universe who are indicted or under investigation, there's probably a handful of folks who aren't, and maybe those are the ones. But again, can you still trust them on TV? Can you, or are you going to always have to bat them back? Are you going to have to always check them? So I do think that the play was, they wanted access, they wanted someone with a certain perspective, but realistically, especially in this whole paid contributors world, the there's going to be very few options available if that's what they want to do. And I don't think it's necessarily wrong-headed in principle, but if that's what they want to do, I would say the overwhelming majority of options are going to present outrageous ethical problems for MSNBC and CNN. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. What's the play? Just to appear unbiased?
No, it's
Like,
not
who are
to.
they trying to please?
It's. I mean, one, I do think it's to appear unbiased, but two, if you go the next step over, you also want ultimate insiders. I don't know how many times have you ever seen Claire McCaskill on MSNBC. She literally is sitting there talking like, I just got off the phone with some senators, and this is what they said. So it's one of it is to have balance, but I also think there's enough Republicans on MSNBC. John Kasich, who's a very conservative former Republican governor of Ohio's on. David Jolly. They've got a couple of whole, you know, they have Stuart Stevens that they talk to a lot. They have the former, I forget Tim's last name, but Tim, one of the guys who was a spokesperson for, worked in the Bush administration. There are a ton of Republicans, Joe Scarborough for heaven's sake, but I don't think it's the issue of balance. I think it's the issue of who are the Republicans who are not. If Here's a question: there's a ton of Republicans that are acceptable, but those Republicans are also falling in the anti-Trump world. And so, if the only Republicans that you have on air are in the anti-Trump world, forget the appearance of balance. How much are you, and I'm going to use a phrase that I used earlier in the episode tonight, how much are you now just going with confirmation bias? I think Adam Kinzinger is on CNN. I think Liz Cheney's not signing it with anyone. She'd be a great get for MSNBC. But how much is Liz Cheney still really truly connected to today's Republican Party? She, so I does that answer your question, or does that just create more questions in some ways?
No, no, I answered my question, but you brought up an interesting point. You said most of them are falling into the anti-Trump world. John, that's the only reasonable position to take, right? It's not like immigration where you could have a range of certain sort of opinions. It's not like healthcare or the vaccines or the lockdowns where some Democrats were like, "Hey, I get it, but we need to move on," right? I understand that the range of certain, like, there's a range of Republicans you could have on there, but being anti-Trump is the only reasonable thing that a reasonable person would expect to do. And so I much rather have a reasonable person on the panel than an unreasonable person for the sake of having an unreasonable person. It doesn't add any value to the situation because it's like getting up there and it's like you're at a like it's like if this was during the COVID stuff, it's like or it's like the Dave Chappelle, like, what do I need to know what Ja Rule thinks? Like, I don't need to necessarily know what the Trump world thinks because I find it to be all extreme and deplorable. Now, I'm biased, right? There's moderate people who do want to hear both sides. In this case, I just don't think there is a second side, right? Like, I understand having a right wing person on during COVID to say, yeah, this is bad, but we have to open restaurants. Like, I understand the need for that for certain people, but I just don't think. I guess my question would be: is what does Ronna offer? Because Claire could offer senators, Liz Cheney could offer the opinion of what it was like to be a congressman, and she has connections. She knows how it works. She knows what it takes to vote on a bill, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What does she offer other than like she all she did was do what Trump asked her to do? Like I guess I think they just made a miscalculation and what does she bring to the table? And I just don't think it's much. And that's why they ultimately got rid of her because I don't think she brought anything to the table that was worth the smoke.